Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Merry Corncrakes podcast with your host, Nathan Hood. The Corncrake podcast is affiliated with the Corncrake magazine, which has been running for over a year now, promoting stories, old and new, which are just great reads, whether it be classics like Dickens and Walter Scott, to modern independent writers. If you want good stories, go over to the corncrakemag.com now and read through this month's edition. And today I'm doing a little bit of an impromptu stream. It's not going to be super long, but I wanted to look at one of the articles in the November issue of the magazine. And it was one that was focusing on Celtic mythology. There were two pieces in there on Celtic mythology. The first was more on artwork, looking at the Tuatha De Danann and the stories around them, the Irish gods, as it were, these kind of supernatural beings who have been relegated now to the Shees, the Barrows, the hills, and live in the underworld or otherworld, the Irish otherworld. And then other great heroes like Finn MacCuail, or the stories of there's the great tale. I can't remember its name at the moment, but it's often called the Irish Iliad, and it's really a fight over who has the prize bull. This wonderful bull, and these two tribes go to battle over it. Very much in keeping with the cattle rustling of that part of the world for centuries. That took place for centuries. But it's interesting that the highlighted story in the Corncrake magazine this month is actually of a different tenor, and it is the voyage of Mael Doon or Maldoon. And this belongs to a whole series of stories, a genre in Irish myth writing and legend of the. And let me get the proper word for this because I'm, I keep mispronouncing it. It is Imrama or Imram, and that really is Gaelic for voyage or something like that. Forgive my pronunciation. There is a number of these voyage stories, whether it be of Maeldoon or Bran, the voyage of Bran. We have the voyage of Saint Brendan, which is very famous during the medieval period. And so these are a mixture. Some of the earlier ones, predating the 8th century, uh, they they are more pagan in tone. But from the 8th century onwards, or the 9th century, I should say, sorry, the 9th century onwards, they tend to be more Christian. And these are not just depictions of sailing to various islands, they tend to have a spiritual or moral or allegorical character. So you've got a hero who's setting out on a quest, and through his adventures, he grows in a certain way and is able to complete the quest, or so, he finally reaches the climax of the quest as a different person. And so this is very much true of Male Dune, as we'll get into. But before we kind of touch on that aspect, I think it's worth saying something about this genre more broadly. Why is it such a feature of Irish mythology, the sea and sailing and voyages? Now, I think on a very uh, practical level, Ireland is an island, and it's not a huge island when you compare it to England and Scotland and Wales. It is a much smaller landmass, so more people are surrounded by the sea. And in ancient and indeed medieval times, most people travelled around that part of the world by boat. Indeed, the highway, as it were, was not a road, but the Irish Sea. If you take certain parts of the Irish Sea, they're very well connected. It's and you look at the maps that are drawn, and they often place the Irish Sea at the centre rather than on a periphery of the landmass, because to the people who live then, the sea was the centre point, and the islands around them are connected by it. So you had kingdoms which straddled between Ireland and the Scottish Isles and the Isle of Man and the north of Wales. And indeed, in some parts of of Ireland and those places, you can see all of those other land masses as well. So the sea becomes the place where people are traveling, where they're connecting with others. And when you look at where settlements are based, many of them are on the coasts or on rivers. Indeed, I was at a talk just the other week, and it was about the Anglo-Saxons in Northumberland. And the chap was making the case that actually, when you study where the Anglo-Saxons settled in Northumberland, it makes most sense to see it in terms of waterways, which they would be traveling through, either in their long ships or in their coracles. And they would be able to move around the kingdom quite quickly then. Whereas if you compare it to traveling by land, the distances become so much bigger and longer and harder to traverse. So he was able to show, oh yes, Lindisfarne, where St. Cuthbert was based, to us it seems remote. It's on an island off the coast, hard to get to. But in those times, he's actually on a highway up and down the east coast of Northumberland, and although he is isolated in the sense he's not in a town, he's by himself or with his monks. Actually, lots of people could stop at Lindisfarne, and it's the same here with the Irish. That Irish Sea is going to be very busy with different traders, raiders, and so on. And so the story of Maelduin fits into that context very well. We have a man, a warrior, who is raised by a king and queen of a tribe. But it turns out that when he was a baby, he was adopted by this king and queen. For he was the son of a nun who was raped by a certain warrior. Now, when he discovers this, Maelduin has to live with this knowledge and goes off and does his adventures, and he defeats somebody in battle. And he tells him about this situation. He tells him, you are not the son of this person. So he goes on to discover this. And another kind of weasel-worded figure, I think of a Wormtongue type character. He tells him, your father was killed, and you should go and avenge your father. And so Maelduin, kind of filled with rage and revenge, goes on a voyage to go and find the killers of his father. It's a kind of it's a blood feud. It's a blood feud, and again, this points again to the character of the time. We've spoken about the sea nature of it, the fact that it's a voyage, and this is quite a common. That these people are primarily voyaging people, but also the blood feud. This is a clan-based society where people live in kinship groups, and their fundamental loyalty is first and foremost to their tribe. And certainly up until the 18th century, in places in Scotland and Ireland, people still lived like that, the clans, before they were decimated by the Hanoverians following the Jacobite uprisings. These were places which had a Gaelic language, Gaelic culture, but each clan had its own distinctiveness. And there was a real culture of avenging the insult and injury to the clan. When you attack my father, this is as a point of honor, I must attack your father. And so often these could spiral, these blood feuds, into the decimations of whole clans, everybody being killed by another group. And these grudges could last for hundreds of years. And oftentimes the church in this period is trying to intervene and end the blood feuds. It's trying to be the peacemaker. And that's quite important for understanding how this story ends. And I think in part because you can read it one way in terms of these things are bad for maintaining society. If you can never really redress the wrong and it keeps spiraling, then it's going to end up with basically a total war. So you want to find a way in which an injury can be dealt with, and then that's the end of the matter. Otherwise, you can't have a stable society. And indeed, for large parts of history, the Celtic clans have not been stable and not been a foundation for building stable civilizations, right? They have remained that kind of tribal warring cultures, right up, as I said, to the 18th century, with the cattle raiders still going on at that period. Think of Rob Roy McGregor as the kind of famous hero of that period. That's what he was. He was a cattle raider, raiding from local tribes and clans and so on. You can't build a trading community. You can't build a intellectual and artistic one. It remains at a primitive level, and that's one aspect. The second is the church, loyalty to clan or loyalty to church. These are competing power centers, and or loyalty to the crown even. And so the crown and the church have at various points trying to weaken the power of clan loyalty, so that they can draw in people to their service first and foremost. Because okay, you can serve both. You can go and do your devotions in church. You can go and pay your tax to the king. But fundamentally, if you're loyal to your clan, if there's a conflict, you stick with the clan. So there's always that tension within this period and later too. So Maelduin goes off on his voyage, and he consults the druids on how to go about this, this is kind of an interesting thing, because when we hear the word druid, we think of pagan, right? But in this story, it seems like the druid is very much in line with Christian theology and talking about honoring God and what you must do to not offend God on this voyage. And as we've seen in other stories in the Corncrake, there tends to be a lot of these mythologies and legends are recorded by Christians, so they're an adaptation maybe of pagan stories. Indeed, it seems though Maelduin itself is inspired by the voyage of Saint Brendan and of Bran, so a pagan and a Christian source. And Saint Brendan's tale may have been inspired by Bran's tale. So there's all this kind of interweaving, and I think these people don't see contradictions so much as maybe we might, or don't feel the tension. They see, as long as it is maybe Christianized or sanctified, this still exists in the world, this kind of pluriform supernatural reality, in a way that we would see more tension typically, which is interesting. It's a more harmonious relationship, at least on the surface. And one of the things that the druids say to Maelduin is, you cannot take any more people on your voyage with you than you already have. If you do, you will anger God. But as he's setting out, his three foster brothers say they want to come on the voyage, and he tells them, no, you can't come. They throw themselves into the sea, saying, if you won't take us, then we will drown. And so, he's a human being. He of compassion and heart, and he doesn't want his brothers to die, so he lets them on board. They then arrive at an island with a fort, and they overhear inside the fort a man boasting about killing Maelduin's father. So they've already found the place they need to be. But God has been angered by the fact that they've taken more men than they were meant to. And so the ship is blown away. And for several years, they're going to have to sail and try and find this island once again. And this is a common trope in these stories. We get the same thing with St. Brendan as well, to a certain degree. That, well, on the very practical level, just of taking people beyond who you're supposed to on your voyage, it upsets the equilibrium, it disrupts the harmony and the law, and so there's a punishment that comes from it. We see this very often in a different way in the Odyssey, where a command is given. Maybe it's sometimes arbitrary seeming, uh, such as not taking more men on your voyage. It could also be more practical. So, like in the Odyssey, there's a point where the men are told not to kill the cows of Helios, and they do. And so Helios is enraged and kills many of them. But either way, there's like a condition that is then violated. And then the violation leads to a consequence, a punishment, and the journey is thus prolonged. And this is the case here with Maeldoon. And so what subsequently happens is he visits several different islands. And I'm not going to describe each of the islands because that, you can read the Corncrake magazine to hear more about them. But there's different kind of temptations which come with them. Some of them, it's the threat of being destroyed by a monster. And of course, the sea for these people is a place where the monsters live. The sea dragons, the Leviathan, the great demons who belong to a different order of life. The sea has always been seen as a place where creatures who do not belong in our world, as it's sustained by Zeus or Odin or God, they belong to a different order. And so when the sea threatens the land and the beings of the land, and so we're in this kind of constant battle with them. Well, they're out in the ocean, and yes, it's a highway to them. They're familiar with it, but they're vulnerable to these alien creatures. So there's the threat of being destroyed. There's also the other temptations, like the temptation of settling down. They go to an island where there are these beautiful women who want to be with them, and they spend a year there in love with these beautiful women, and they offer them the gift of eternal youth. Now, many people might give up the voyage there and stop going on the quest for revenge. And Maeldoon is very tempted. He wants to stay and love this lady. But the other men are restless, and they eventually head out to sea once more. And I think this is quite an interesting comment on the male drive for adventure and heroism, and how it often comes into conflict with the settling down and establishment of a family life. Not to say that family life isn't something which has nobility and heroism and excitement, but it's not the same as voyaging across the sea. There's also the fact that, and I think many of us wrestle with that, those competing desires and drives. And if you go fully up one way, it is a bit of a zero-sum game. So you then lose the other. You see this in the Lord of the Rings, actually, in the character of Samwise, who, the Fellowship of the Ring, they're all unmarried men. They go off on their quest, they achieve great things, and then they come back to the Shire, the hobbits, they overthrow Saruman's tyranny and set about re-establishing it. But once he's back, Sam is now married to Rosie Cotton. He has a child with her, and he feels that he's being pulled more towards them than to his previous friendship with Frodo. He still loves Frodo, he cares for him, but he wants to spend more time with his wife and children. And indeed, when he has the opportunity to go on adventure back to Rivendell, yeah, he would like to, but actually he really wants to stay with Rosie and Eleanor, his daughter. And so eventually Frodo, in part of the reason why he leaves is he says he wants to stop tearing Sam in two and make him whole. And so he leaves the Shire, goes across the sea, which is interesting. We'll come back to that in a moment or two. And Sam is able to devote his life to his family from there. So there is this sense in the Lord of the Rings, which isn't often kind of drawn out, that actually, yes, adventure is a young man's game, an unmarried man's game, a man who has not settled down. Family life, community, building the home, these are good things, but it neuters the ability to go off on the adventure. I mean, even kind of historically, this has been seen too, that the I'll give you one example. I'm sure there are many out there, but the Kyrios. These were in ancient times the Slavic Russo tribes. They would send their young men out, adolescents, to live together. And these adolescents would be outside of society and they would go raiding. And they would learn the skills they would need to survive and become good warriors. And what they raided, they would return to the people with. So these unmarried men are able to go off and do things and be conquerors and travel where they will. But when they're ready, when they're initiated, they then belong in the community and they develop their family and they protect their land. So you can see that dynamic here. So Meldoon has that opportunity to settle down and give up his quest. But the other men are restless. They don't want to stay anymore. They've had their fill of a satisfied life, a settled life, but they want something more. I suppose you could also tie this in with various notions that the Western man developed this desire to explore and to conquer, and it's something which is quite fundamental in us. Even something like going for a hike in the Lake District, or walking across a mighty fjord, going on a boat to visit a new land. These are things which we're impelled to do. And this isn't just like something modern. This goes back to medieval times and before. I think that there is something there in these characters who feel there's something beyond this that we're missing. And it gets manifested in a physical exploration here. I think a Christian response to this, or somebody like St. Augustine, and certainly there's some of these other Irish voyage stories are trying to say, look, really, your voyage is towards God, and that's where you're really heading. All these other things cannot fully satisfy, and that's the real destination in the afterlife. So they go on their way again, and through their various trials, the three men who jumped aboard, who weren't supposed to be there, end up either dead or in some sort of delirious, trapped state where they are no longer part of the quest. And so by their removal, Meldoon is able to get closer to his intended target, or return to it. So we can see that as the removing of those vices, purging those things which were sinful, allows you to grow towards that which you're intending to get towards. But just before he gets to the island, and I think it's the penultimate one, he meets a hermit there who has been there, on the island for a long time. And he tells Meldoon, you must forgive this man who's killed your father. You have been blessed. God has saved you from many incidents on this journey. Many times you should have been destroyed by sea monsters and dragons, and God raised an even bigger sea monster or dragon to kill it for you. Many times you would have been ensnared by demons throwing fire at you, but God protected you. So now you must be humble, and you must recognize that it is God's grace that you live. And so by the same token, do not deal out this judgment upon him, and show mercy to him too, just as God has shown you mercy. And so when they arrive on that island, rather than go and continue the blood feud, Meldoon forgives the man, who himself shows great hospitality to Meldoon, and the blood feud is ended. And so this circles back to what I was telling you earlier, that in the church often tried to act as a mediator between warring clans and tribes and bring about the end of the cycle of violence, so that there could be peaceable relations. And we see this in this story here, rather than an act of possibly righteous revenge. Although I think, when we look at this story, it's kind of interesting because, as I said, what sets Meldoon off on this quest is this kind of sneaky character who's saying, you should avenge your father. But who was Meldoon's father? He was a rapist. who attacked his mother. He never had anything to do with them and didn't try to raise him. I think in itself that's a little bit of a criticism of this sort of code of honor. I put honor in quotation marks, where these men feel they have to avenge their paternal and maternal relatives, even though Meldoon has really no connection to them. They had no place in his life. They didn't raise him, and indeed his father was a pretty awful person. And yet he feels compelled to defend his honor and destroy a whole other clan. Whereas actually one could see his father's death as judgment upon him for his awful crimes against his mother. So I think there's a very strong kind of critique and within this of that kind of traditional kinship, honor-bound loyalty, but also a message of reconciliation, which is quite interesting. I think just a couple more comments before we finish up, because as I said, this isn't a super long piece, and I would really recommend reading it in the Corncrake. It's a good story, and there's much more than I've said. Just on the location again, I mentioned that the sea is an alien place, both familiar and alien to these people, and that within it belongs things which are not of our order of life. The whales and the dolphins are somewhat close to us, but even then they feel like they exist in a very different mode of being. But there's something more about the sea. You'll often, if you remember old Jordan Peterson clips, he'll say the sea is chaos and the land is order. And so when you're out in the chaos, it threatens to overthrow the ordered world of Zeus, and so the mighty battle of Typhon and Zeus is between order and chaos. And this is the heart of all the great mythologies, etc., etc. Now, there's some truth to that. I think we can go a bit further though, and say, well, when you're on a voyage, you are not rooted. You have no home as such, or if you do have a home, it's far away, like in the Odyssey. So you're in a state of impermanence and transitory life, and indeed the sea around you is constantly changing, right? It's never the same, even when it's still. There are ripples and movement in the sea, and there's nowhere to kind of build a foundation or build a house. You can anchor for a while, but you are kind of drifting or atop a mighty ocean, which in a sense it's a void that you could just fall in and fall to the bottom of forever. Like there's nothing there. And what's more, you are so in the grip of forces beyond you. Your boat, your little coracle, let's say, can just be swept by currents of great power. You are a fragile being in the ocean. In many ways, it feels like you are beheld to forces beyond your control, whether it be the animals or the environment itself. The ocean, with its great power, can just pick you up and destroy you in a moment. For a person writing in the 9th century, is this not the experience of life itself being replicated or brought forth here? Firstly, on just the sense of being under the influence of God and the powers of this world, the supernatural forces. They believe that these forces can do these things in the sea, that they can send rains and storms and good weather and bad weather. The sea is the perfect representation of that. When you're lifted up by a wave, it's almost like the powers who govern the waves are doing that to you. And there's nothing you can do to resist it. You're totally at their mercy. Moreover, there's a sense in which, for these people, there's a transitoriness to life that they recognize, and certainly Anglo-Saxon literature has this too, in poems like The Wanderer, that while things will remain for a time as they are, they will naturally, the cycles will turn, and there will be a change, whether it's the rise or fall of an individual or group. And so this life, there's nothing, and certainly the warfare that these people experience adds to that sense, because they're vulnerable to piracy, to other tribes, and often there's a lot of migration caused by the destruction of one people by another, and so a movement to a new place and so on. And then the course of life itself ends in death. And when you add in the facts of what I was saying about how there's this recognition that our desires are never met in this life either, never fully at least, then yes, life is like being a voyage on a sea. And it doesn't find its resolution here. I think that's something that can be conveyed through this story. And it's only in the afterlife, when one reaches their, hopefully, heaven for these people, such as St. Brendan, that there is contentment, that there is a place to dock. So I think it's quite a powerful image, and it's one that we've certainly lost, I think, because our lives, although there's a lot of movement in our lives, we can live relatively settled. Our houses aren't going to be attacked by Viking raiders at some point. And we can be pretty comfortable. We're pretty immune to the elements in a way that our forebears were not, buffeted around. And we've lost the sense or the awareness of death being around the corner as well. Whereas for these people, yes, anything could really lead to death. A small cut could get infected and kill you in a way that today would be extremely rare. A flu, a cold, could kill you in a way that today is extremely rare. So I think we've lost some of the potency of the sea and the voyage. And also because we don't do voyages by boat anymore, really. Most of us travel by car, train, aeroplane if it's a long journey. So we don't have that experience of being years out at sea looking for an island of some kind or a destination. So it's a bit different to us. It's a bit different, but I still feel there is at least for myself, coming from a family who were North Sea fishermen, that I can feel a tingle of it within me. This story resonates with a part of who I am. So yes, that is Mael Doom, and I would recommend that you check out his voyage in the Corncrake magazine, that you look into others as well, like St. Brendan. I think his is great fun. And if you're doing your own writing, maybe consider how voyage literature and imagery could be used in your own work. Please feel free to comment below. I'll look forward to seeing your comments and engaging with them. Oh, and before I go, there is one last thing I should say, actually. I can't believe I nearly forgot this. So the literature, I'm going to re-say it, the Imram or Imram, it actually has a place in two of fantasy's greatest writers in the 20th century. First, C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, is basically one of these stories, right? And it consists of them going on a voyage, stopping at various islands, and eventually reaching a climax when the characters have changed and have developed, that they get to the edge of the world. And there's a kind of culminating moment. It's also a key theme in Tolkien, and the notion of the sea and traveling to the Undying Lands or to the west, which is where the elves have left and are seeking to return to, where Frodo's going to go. This is there, and he actually wrote. Tolkien spent over a decade writing and rewriting his own version of the Voyage of St. Brendan. So these stories are not just something which remains in the Irish mythology. They actually had an impact upon works which are typically seen as influenced by Christian, Norse, Saxon and medieval literature don't often think about the Gallic influence on Tolkien, but it's there in that voyage notion that he's exploring, and he does explore in his work. And it's there in C.S. Lewis too. So something to think about, and something I'm going to have to explore a bit more in my own reading of these two writers, and notice it a bit more when I'm considering it, especially when I look at Erendil, very much an Anglo-Saxon name and character, but how maybe the Gaelic has influenced it. Well, till next time, thank you very much, everybody, for watching, for tuning in, and as I say, go to thecorncrakemag.com for more like this. All the best. Bye.